The following program is being brought to you by the Farmhouse Cafe and Mind, Body, Spirit of Omaha.
Souls be looking for a healing, and he's healing them, filling some of them with his spirit.
My name is Hesselgesser, and this is Hesselgesser on Purpose. You know, one of the purposes of this show is to empower and inform, and tonight we hope we do just that. Tonight is our very special guest. We have Dr. Moshe Gershovich, and he's actually a professor at UNL. So when we come back, we'll welcome him to the show. Welcome back to Hesselgesser on Purpose. Thanks for joining us. And I'd like to welcome our guest, Dr. Moshe Gershovich. Dr. Gershovich, thank you so much for being on this evening. I appreciate you being here very much. So a little bit about your background. We were just talking before we went on air. You apologized for your accent. You said you've been here for 27 years and you didn't have an accent until you got here. Yeah. I had to tell that to our audience. I think that's cute.
Of course, now when I'm in my own native country of Israel, they say I speak Hebrew with American accent.
Now, you were born in Israel.
Yes, I was.
And you are a professor at UNO.
Yes, I teach history, mostly Middle East history. And needless to say, the Middle East is very much in the news, has been for a while.
Absolutely. I'm interested, I've read your background and resume, and I'm interested in your viewpoint about the ongoing conflict, because it seems like you have a unique perspective, because you can speak, really to both sides based on your education and based on your experience and based on your descent. Would you agree?
Well, I can say that I've had a very unique opportunity that I think very few people coming from Israel have enjoyed, of spending a substantial amount of time, about 2.5 years, working, teaching, doing research in Morocco, which is, of course, a predominantly Arab Muslim country. And therefore, it provided me with an opportunity to see a different perspective than the one that I grew up with. Also, it just happened that the best friend that I have, who actually lives in Mississippi, happens to be a Palestinian Christian. And we go back for almost the time that I came to the U.S., a little bit after, so over 26 years. And obviously from my friendship with him, I can say that I've got more in-depth outlook about some of these issues that are very much at the news these days.
Sure. For our viewers at home and here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the conflict as we sit today. The statistics are frightening. Since early July, over 2,000 Palestinians have been killed, and most of them have been civilians, with more than 11,000 wounded and over 100,000 left homeless. And on the Israeli side, 64 soldiers and 6 civilians. One of the reasons we do the show is to inform and empower people, and to talk about our community, but also to make sure that people have an understanding about what's going on around us, but how it affects our community as well. Talk a little bit about the conflict from your perspective, and maybe give our listeners and our viewers a perspective of how it came to be in the first place from your perspective. I mean, it's been going on for a long time.
At least 65, 70 years, of course. And obviously in such a short space, it would be impossible to provide a very comprehensive picture. This is a matter for courses that I'm teaching.
Yes.
It would take much more than this. But let me start with the numbers a little bit, because, well, the numbers, we say the numbers don't lie, but there is a little more to it to understand. And one of the things that we need to understand when we think about the small number of Israeli casualties versus Palestinian casualties is the type of warfare that has been going on specifically in Gaza, which involves, it's what I would call an asymmetrical kind of warfare between, on the one hand, a country that is fairly stable, fairly advanced in more than one way, and obviously, among other things, has a very powerful and potent military force, equipped with, of course, the best technology.
Absolutely.
Versus an organization that, while having a political aspect to it, also has a military wing, which, for lack of better words, is a terrorist organization, whose goal, as stated, is to destroy the state of Israel and to prevent a solution that would allow for long-term stability. And the problem is that, on the one hand, you have a country that is very capable of defending its population, thanks to that technology, especially what is known as the Iron Dome, versus an organization that operates from within civilian population, taking shelter within it, and essentially using that population as human shields. And the dilemma that the Israeli side has been having, not for the first time this summer, is how do you prevent those attacks against Israel while minimizing civilian casualties, what we sometimes call, and I hate this expression, collateral damage. And this is a real dilemma. And I won't say necessarily that, that everything that Israel has done over the summer was right. There are certainly things to be looked at, and the Israelis themselves are looking at them, as well as, of course, the international community. But for the most part, the choices are not all that great. And one can only imagine how many Israeli casualties would have been there if there wasn't the Iron Dome. And the casualties then would have been at least in the hundreds, and then this optic of 2,000 versus 6 would look very different. So in a sense, when people ask me what I think about this ratio of casualties, sometimes I ask them, okay, what would you like, that there would be more Israeli casualties? No, nobody wants it. And nobody wants the Palestinian casualties either. But the dilemma is not one that has an easy solution, as the U.S. itself has found in our fighting over the last decade in Afghanistan, in Iraq, where the bad guys are typically very difficult to be distinguished from the innocents.
Those that are trying to,
So this is with respect to the casualties. Now, if we want to start looking at the broader conflict, one other comment here, perhaps, and this is that while we, in many ways, look at the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians as, in the small core of it, there is a broader perspective, of course. Part of it is regional, and this is the whole relationship between Israel and the Arab world. And then if you look at the whole map of the Middle East, and we don't have the visuals here, Israel is very, very tiny versus,
very small versus
huge area around it. And while recently, in the last few years, it hasn't been so much a direct conflict between Israel and its Arab neighbors, in the history, when we go back, there is a history of several wars, 48, 56, 67, 73, in which that was a regional conflict, in which the Palestinians were either not a factor or only a small fraction. And the whole question of long-term peace also involves the question of the integration of Israel within the region. And then there is the broader context as well, which leads us to issues like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and similar organizations, the whole phenomenon of what may not have been the best expression then, but the clash of civilization theory, the West versus Islam, and beyond this, the issue of non-state agencies that are trying to disrupt the order in the world and the economy of the world. And the Israeli-Palestinian story is a segment of that larger story as well. It belongs and it doesn't belong at the same time, in a sense.
Sure.
So if you look strictly and only at the Israeli-Palestinian prism, you know, the impression that, again, the optic is mighty Israel versus the poor Palestinians. David and Goliath.
Yeah.
If you look at Israel as a tiny country in a huge area that is predominantly Arab Muslim, the perspective is different. When you think of it in the broader context of what has been going on in the Middle East, the instability of the region, then it becomes even more complicated, not only when we think about how we got here, but also when we start thinking about where are we heading from here. So these are some broad comments. Now, I don't think that we should go into a history lesson.
No.
And in a sense,
Well, I just wanted to get your perspective of it too. And sometimes there's, given your background, given your heritage, given your teachings, I would think that you would. I can tell that you have some passion about it, but I would think that you would have a different perspective as to, sometimes there's that thing that you wish people would know. You wish that people in Omaha would know. The media does not necessarily tell us that. We're not privy to the conversations that go on when the Secretary of State travels and whatnot. So I was just curious about what your perspective is as to where you think things are today, and is there something that you wish that we would know that we wouldn't have unless we had your perspective?
I'm not sure exactly how to
answer that?
Begin consider this. I mean, obviously, part of what I do, and many other good people who have acquired experience and knowledge, and obviously bring their own backgrounds as well, is to educate the community. This is what we are all about, and I think that what I try to urge my students and other people in the community that I happen to interact with is to not be satisfied with sound bites and not to rush into adopting what seems to be the
headline?
Not just the headline, but I think one of the things as an outsider to America, as a naturalized American, I always find great positive in American outlook, which is very much positive, forward thinking. The idea that every problem has a solution. We just need to work hard enough,
right,
and you get the solution. And
we have very bad memories,
and not the best geography, I'm afraid. But there is something comforting about it, because the perspective of the old world, Europeans and Middle Eastern, is much more pessimistic, you might say realistic perhaps, but that not every problem has a solution. And I think this is somewhat of a different perspective. And even if we find a solution, it's not going to be a perfect solution. When people speak about peace, and we all want peace, everybody wants peace. I don't know anybody who doesn't want peace,
right,
but they want peace their way.
Right. And when you dissect that, what does that truly mean?
Right. So are we ever going to get a peace of the kind, let's say, that the U.S. has with Canada? Probably not. I mean, even among Europeans, you look at the French and the Germans and their history of conflicts, and now they sort of tolerate each other most of the time. I don't know that, at least in my lifetime, we'll get to that type of peace. I can only be hopeful, because in some ways Israelis and Palestinians share so much in common. I sometimes like to say that Israelis and Palestinians are either the best of enemies or the worst of friends, in a sense, because they do share a lot in culture, in food, in music, in taste. And when, on the personal level, just like this friend of mine, Charles, when we came to know each other, we almost immediately became good friends, because we had so much culturally in common. But it's what's really at the core of things is great mistrust between the two sides. I'm talking here about people with good faith. And these are, I think, the majority in both societies. But they mistrust each other. You know, the Palestinians are convinced that the Israelis only want to expand, take more of their land. They look at the settlements, they look at the soldiers, the occupation, and they have a grievance which I can identify with to a large degree. The Israelis believe the same thing about the Palestinians, that all they want is to destroy the state of Israel, and that they would take any means, be it violent or conniving.
Right.
So the problem is that we've tried, that there was a whole decade almost, the 90s, about 7-8 years, where what we call the Oslo process, where I can tell you personally, I was very optimistic. Maybe because I've been here in this country rather than in Israel, where it's always much more difficult when you are right there in the middle of everything, and everything is so immediate. And I was very optimistic, and I was very frustrated when we came that close to peace in 2000 in what was known as Camp David II, and then started the second Palestinian uprising or Intifada, and since then things have not been good.
Right.
And part of me thinks that it's one of those situations where we won't get a solution. But the other part of me tries to be more optimistic and to take more of that American approach that basically every problem that is man-made can be also solved by men. And I do want to believe that human beings on both sides
want that.
Yeah, because they want the best for their children. I mean, this is the most natural thing. You want something better for your children.
Absolutely.
One of the things, looking at the Palestinian mindset, which is very depressing in a sense, I think that Palestinian society, the way I look at it, is a traumatized society. Because of the occupation, no question. That's pretty much at the core of things. But, you know, a society that glorifies what we call suicide bombing. I mean, the notion of a mother who expresses joy that her son or daughter got killed while killing others.
Yeah.
This is something that is profoundly wrong.
Yeah. And completely foreign.
Understanding where it derives from until they can overcome this. I think that the possibility for peace would be very small because, as I mentioned, this is asymmetrical conflict. There's no question the Israelis have not only greater power, but they also have the goods. They have the territories. It's the Israelis who are supposed to give up and take a chance to give something that they have, and the Palestinians to receive it. And while we have this mistrust between the two sides, very little can be achieved.
So let's talk a little bit about you on a personal note. So you have been here 27 years.
In this country.
In this
Omaha,
country.
about 14.
About 14. So what brought you to Omaha? I'm just curious, you know, out of all the...
It was a flood. No, what brought me to Omaha was a job that I got at UNO. I got the position at UNO and liked it and stayed here.
Because you earned your bachelor's at Tel Aviv University.
Yes.
And your PhD at Harvard.
Yes.
And
I spent the first 13 years of my American career in Boston at Harvard and MIT, and then I had an interlude, an enormously interesting interlude in Morocco at a small university there where I taught and conducted research on, of all things, the oral history of Moroccans who fought in the French army during World War II, which is my area of specialization. And I must say, I fell in love with Morocco. It's, you know, I always have my native Israel and the U.S., but then I have Morocco as my third country of passion.
Now, you're as you mentioned, you're a professor of modern Middle Eastern history. What is a philosophy that you try to get across to your students?
Well, most of my students, of course, are from the Midwest. Many of them first-generation college students. And I think the Midwest, as somebody whose previous experience was in the East Coast, which is in some ways, especially the Boston area, a bit more cosmopolitan in a sense. I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about and trying to encourage students is study abroad. An experience of a different culture. The understanding that there is more than just America. America is a great thing. And obviously at the Midwest, I think we all love
Kind
the
of
culture.
exemplifies
I don't know if
it.
you're originally from the Midwest, but of course I adjusted myself. And it was a cultural shock in many ways. Because even Boston is closer to what I was used to before than coming here.
I'm sure. Now, you've heard of the Cornhuskers football?
Yeah, not a big fan of the football, but we leave that aside. But, but to get back to it, it's enormously important for people to get a global perspective. And going and immersing oneself in a different culture and seeing a little bit through the eyes of others. Something that you can't get from here. Even if you take all my classes here, you won't be able to do it the same way as if you spend some time
Experience it firsthand.
in another culture and start looking at people at the eye level and understanding them as people. And one of the things that, especially after 9/11, and I came here just before 9/11, and people were sort of asking me the classic question: why do they hate us, and what do they think about us? And I tried to explain to them about. And I use sort of an example from one of the trips. I took some students to Morocco, and that was right after the invasion of Iraq in 2004. And I remember that evening we were coming back from a field trip, and we're stopping to eat something, and we're standing there in the middle of the street. That was 9:30 at night, and this guy comes to me, and just like that, he says, "I hate America," in English. And then he adds in Arabic, he says, "Uhib nas," which means I like the people. And then he continues in English, "but I hate America." Now, what I take from this, I simply basically went away, didn't want to start discussing with him, but what I take from it is that many people have problem with the concept of what we represent, our foreign policy, especially at that time, and in some ways, I guess, later on as well. But they have nothing against people, against Americans. And that's why I think that obviously we've taken the proper precautions and not going to all sorts of, right now, there are all sorts of places in the Middle East I wouldn't go and wouldn't take students. But there are still places like Morocco, for example, where I feel that it's still safe and
you would encourage
interesting
people
to go. And I'm actually organizing a trip for next May to take students and community members to Morocco. I, of course, took a group of students and community members to Israel earlier in December, thankfully before everything started. It was a great trip. So any opportunity to take people and to show them the culture
and to explore.
Get them, that's what I feel very passionate about.
You're the director of the Schwab Center, and I want you to talk just briefly about what that is. I'll have to admit I was not familiar until I met you.
What I try to do is really to serve a purpose, in a sense, for people who are not Jewish, people who want to know about Israel or about Judaism, but that basically don't know where to go, both within UNO. Of course, our first priority is our students,
of course,
but also beyond that, and provide them with opportunities. That trip was an opportunity. Classes that we do, we have a visiting Israeli professor now for the second year, and it's a fantastic guy. He's an author who has written a number of books, some of them translated to English. We're going to have a nice event for the publication of his book in English later on in November at Bookworms, in the new location. So providing opportunities, bringing speakers, bringing films, working, for example, with film streams and things of that nature. Any opportunity to bring the diversity of Israel, because Israel is really a fascinating society. And also emphasizing that Israel is not only Jewish, there are other people as well. And trying to bring as much of their diversity and show as many faces of Israel. Last year, for example, we had an art exhibit of local artists, including my wife, I must say, who is a fantastic artist. That's a different
Wonderful.
right there. But on the motif of, we call it "My heart is in the east and I'm in the furthest west," which is it's actually a line from a very famous medieval poem by one of the greatest poets of Jewish Spain. Of course, the east being Jerusalem, being the land of Israel, and the people who are in the Midwest, Jewish artists, Israeli artists who work here. So that was an event like this, trying to bring the culture of Israel and
awareness, and bring a community.
And Judaism as well, again, in its most pluralistic and inclusive. I think inclusive is the best word, and trying to build coalitions with everyone who wants to work with us.
Yeah.
You know, I had some things that I did with the Black Studies Department at UNO, looking for cooperation with the African American community, Women's Studies program.
Well, good.
Whatever I can think of.
That.
And one thing that, if I may have a little pitch here, I'm also in charge of what is called the Middle East Project Fund, which is more broadly the Middle East. And one of the things that we created that is a great success is the Middle East Forum, which is a monthly meeting at UNO. It's always on a Thursday, noontime, so people bring their lunch and questions.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And we have some big questions, like right now, what are we going to do about ISIS? Is the big question.
That's a big,
and we have a panel of experts, people who, not just me, but we have some terrific people at UNO who can relate to this question.
Yeah.
So we have this one next week, and I would like to, since the program will air before then,
we'll let people know. And we'll put something on the screen too. Dr. Gershovich, you've certainly enlightened my awareness and opened my perspective, and I really appreciate it. I'm a fan of your work, and we hope to have you on again. Please join us next week. We have Dan Basselman in, the owner of the Farmhouse Cafe. In the meantime, I'm Robin Hesselgesser, reminding you to live your life on purpose.
Another day living in them, another day living in the millennium. Souls be looking for a healing, and he's healing them. Filling some of them with his spirit. The devil killing some of them softly, cause they ain't.
This program has been brought to you by the Farmhouse Cafe and Mind, Body, Spirit of Omaha.